17 phones rose into the air, all pointed at her like weapons ready to fire. The boy in the front row stood up with a cruel smile spreading across his face, and his voice cut through the silence like a blade. "Everyone, take out your phones, document everything. Let us make this one memorable." The other students laughed, that cold, merciless laughter that had driven 23 teachers out of this classroom in just 2 years. But this teacher, this woman in her simple blue dress with her worn leather bag, did something none of the others had done. She smiled back at them and said words that would change everything. "Fine, but while you are recording, I have a question for you." She turned to the whiteboard and wrote 3 words that made the laughter die in their throats: "Who hurt you?" This was the beginning of a battle that would shake the foundations of the most prestigious private school in the city. And it all started with a classroom that every teacher feared more than losing their job, more than public humiliation, more than anything else in their professional lives. The classroom sat on the 3rd floor, and it was not haunted by ghosts or cursed by some ancient spell. No, what lived inside those 4 walls was far worse than any supernatural terror. 17 students occupied that space, and these were not ordinary children. They were the sons and daughters of the most powerful people in the city: lawyers who could destroy careers with a single phone call, politicians who controlled budgets and policies, business tycoons who owned half the real estate downtown, celebrities whose faces appeared on billboards, and judges who held the scales of justice in their hands. These parents had donated millions to the school over the years. They built the library with its floor-to-ceiling windows and mahogany shelves. They funded the science lab with equipment most universities could not afford. They paid for the football stadium that could seat 3,000 people. And because of this, because of all that money flowing into the school's accounts, their children believed they were untouchable. The terrifying truth was that they were absolutely right. 23 teachers had walked into that classroom over the last 2 years, and 23 teachers had walked out broken, some of them so shattered they never taught again. Some quit within hours of their first class, their hands shaking as they signed resignation papers in the principal's office. Some lasted a few days before the reality of what they were facing crushed their spirits completely. One teacher, a man with 30 years of experience and awards lining his office walls, walked out during his very first lesson and never came back. He did not even collect his belongings. His coffee mug still sat on the desk, his lesson plans still lay open on the chair, his jacket still hung on the coat rack. He just vanished as if the classroom had consumed him whole. Another teacher, a young woman fresh from university with her teaching degree still smelling of fresh ink, had been full of hope and dreams when she started. She had decorated the classroom with motivational posters and brought in plants to make the space feel welcoming. She lasted 3 days. On the 4th morning, the principal found her resignation letter on his desk, and the paper was stained with tears that had smudged the ink in places, making her words almost illegible. The students did not use physical violence. They were far too smart for that. Physical violence left evidence, and evidence could be used against them. No, they used something far more devastating. They used words like surgical instruments, cutting precisely where it would hurt the most. They used manipulation like master chess players, always thinking 3 moves ahead. They found your weakness within minutes of meeting you, and they exploited it without mercy, without hesitation, without any sign of conscience. They recorded teachers having breakdowns on their phones, and posted the videos online where thousands of people could watch and comment and share. They filed fake complaints with the school board, claiming teachers had said inappropriate things or touched them inappropriately or discriminated against them. They lied to their parents with such conviction that even hardened skeptics believed every word. And their parents always took their side, because in their world their children could do no wrong. The principal had tried everything he could think of to fix the situation. He begged parents to discipline their children, to set boundaries, to teach them respect and empathy. The parents laughed in his face and asked if he wanted to lose his job, because they could make that happen with a single phone call to the school board chairman, who happened to be the father of one of the students. He tried separating the students into different classes, thinking maybe their power came from being together. The parents threatened to withdraw their donations, and the school would collapse without that money. Teachers would lose their jobs, programs would be cut, the school itself might have to close. He was trapped in a cage made of money and influence, and every teacher who entered that classroom became another casualty in a war no one knew how to win. Then she came, and nothing would ever be the same again. She was not what anyone expected when she walked into the principal's office on a Tuesday morning in September. She was in her late 30s, average height, average build, with nothing about her appearance that suggested she was special or different or capable of facing what waited for her on the 3rd floor. She wore a simple blue dress that looked like it came from a department store clearance rack, and she carried an old leather bag that had seen better days, its strap worn thin from years of use. Her resume was modest to the point of being unremarkable. She had taught at public schools in rough neighborhoods for 15 years, But she had no awards gathering dust on shelves, no fancy degrees with impressive Latin words, no publications in educational journals that other teachers cited in their research. The principal looked at her resume and then looked at her, trying to understand what would bring someone to apply for a position that had become notorious in educational circles throughout the city. Teachers warned each other about this school, about this classroom, the way sailors once warned each other about dangerous waters and hidden rocks. "Why do you want this job?" he asked, genuinely curious because most applicants ran away the moment they learned which position was available. She smiled softly, a smile that seemed to carry years of experience and pain and understanding all mixed together. "Because I heard you have a classroom that needs a teacher." The principal leaned back in his chair, studying her face for a long moment, looking for signs of naivety or desperation or hidden motives. Then he sighed deeply, the kind of sigh that comes from carrying a burden too heavy for one person to bear. "Let me be honest with you," he said, his voice heavy with exhaustion and defeat. "The classroom I need filled is not a normal classroom. The students inside are children of very important people. They are intelligent, sometimes frighteningly so. They are privileged beyond anything most people can imagine. And they have destroyed every teacher who has tried to teach them, broken them down piece by piece until there was nothing left." She listened without expression, her face calm and unreadable. 23 teachers, the principal continued, and his voice cracked slightly because he had watched good people walk into that classroom full of hope and walk out hollow. "In 2 years, some of them were the best educators I have ever known in my 30 years in education. One of them had won national teaching awards and been featured in magazines. Another had written textbooks that are used across the country in hundreds of schools. They all failed, they all quit. Some of them left education entirely and found different careers because they could not face a classroom again." He paused and looked directly into her eyes, wanting her to understand the full weight of what she was walking into. "I cannot expel these students no matter what they do. I cannot discipline them in any meaningful way. Their parents control this school through their donations and their connections and their power. If you take this job, you will be alone in that classroom. I will not be able to protect you from what they will do. Do you understand what I am saying?" She nodded slowly, and something in her eyes suggested she understood far more than he realized. "Why would you want to walk into that situation?" he asked, genuinely baffled because it seemed like volunteering to step into a burning building. She was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke her voice carried the weight of old wounds that had healed but left scars. 15 years ago I was a student just like them. I was angry at the world and everyone in it. I was cruel because cruelty was the only power I had. I made my teachers cry, and I felt strong when I saw tears running down their faces. I thought I was powerful because my words could hurt people, because I could make adults who were supposed to be in control lose that control. She paused and her eyes grew distant, as if she was seeing herself as that angry young girl again. "Then one teacher changed everything. She did not quit like the others. She did not cry when I said horrible things to her. She stayed day after day, week after week, even when I did everything I could to drive her away. And she saved my life by refusing to give up on me when everyone else had." Hey my people, if you're feeling this story already, do me a favor and drop a like right now. Comment where in the world you're watching from because I love seeing this storytelling family grow across every corner of the globe. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button because this story is about to get even more intense. Trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. Now let's get back to this teacher. Her first day was about to become a nightmare she could never have prepared for. She looked at the principal with absolute certainty. "Maybe I cannot save these children, maybe they will break me like they broke the others, but I have to try because someone tried for me when I did not deserve it when no one else would." The principal stared at her for a long time, seeing something in her that he had not seen in any of the other 23 applicants. Then he stood up and extended his hand, knowing he might be sending her into a situation that would destroy her but unable to deny her the chance to try. "You start tomorrow," he said quietly. "May God help you because I cannot." She arrived at the school early the next morning before the sun had fully risen and while the parking lot was still mostly empty. The hallways were quiet, her footsteps echoing on the marble floors as she walked toward the third floor, and with each step her heart beat a little faster. She had faced difficult students before in her 15 years of teaching. She had been cursed at and threatened and insulted. She had dealt with poverty and violence and broken homes. But something about this felt different, heavier, like the air itself was thick with something dark and oppressive. She reached the classroom door and stopped, her hand on the doorknob. She could hear laughter inside, loud and mocking, the kind of laughter that has cruelty baked into it. She took a deep breath, knowing that once she walked through this door there would be no going back, and then she pushed it open and stepped inside. The room fell silent immediately. as if someone had pressed a mute button on the world. 17 pairs of eyes turned to look at her, and the weight of their collective gaze was almost physical. Some students sat on desks instead of chairs, their expensive shoes leaving marks on the wood. Others had their feet up on chairs, treating the furniture like it was disposable. One student in the back was already recording her on a phone, documenting her arrival like a predator watching prey enter its territory. The walls were covered with graffiti that previous teachers had not dared to clean, crude drawings, obscene words, names of teachers with cruel comments beside them. The air smelled like expensive perfume and cologne mixed with something else, something that could only be described as arrogance made tangible. She walked to the front of the room and set her bag on the desk with deliberate slowness. She did not speak immediately, which confused the students because the others had always rushed to establish authority to start talking to try to take control. Instead, she looked at each student one by one, making eye contact with every single person in that room. Some students smirked, their faces showing contempt and anticipation. Others rolled their eyes, already bored with what they assumed would be another easy victory. A few looked away uncomfortably, as if actual eye contact was something foreign and unsettling. Finally, after what felt like an eternity but was probably only 30 seconds, she spoke, "Good morning." No one responded, the silence stretched out thick and hostile. She nodded as if she expected this exact response, as if their silence told her everything she needed to know. "I know who you are," she said calmly, her voice steady and clear. "I know your parents are powerful enough to make problems disappear. I know you have made 23 teachers quit this classroom. I know you think you are untouchable." A boy in the front row laughed loudly, a sharp sound that cut through the air. He was tall with perfectly styled hair that probably cost more to maintain than most people spent on groceries, and he wore designer clothes that screamed wealth and privilege. Even sitting down, he radiated confidence and cruelty in equal measure, like someone who had never been told no in his entire life. 24, he said, holding up his phone with a grin that showed perfect white teeth. "You will be number 24, I am already recording. How long do you think you will last? I am betting 1 hour. He looked around at the other students. "What do you all think?" Other students laughed and started making their own bets, treating her survival like it was a game. Someone shouted 30 minutes. Another said she would cry in 10. A girl in designer jeans said 5 minutes before the first tears. She waited for the noise to die down, standing completely still, and then she did something no other teacher had ever done in this classroom. She smiled. Not a nervous smile or a forced smile, but a genuine smile that seemed to carry understanding and acceptance. "You are probably right," she said, and her words made the laughter stop like someone had flipped a switch. The students looked confused, glancing at each other because this was not how teachers were supposed to respond. "What?" the boy in front asked, his confidence faltering slightly. "You are probably right," she repeated, her voice calm and almost gentle. "You have beaten 23 teachers. You are smart, probably smarter than most adults I know. You are ruthless and you know exactly how to find someone's weakness and destroy them without leaving evidence. Why would I be any different from all the others who came before me?" She paused and looked around the room, making sure every student heard what came next. "I grew up poor. My father left when I was 6 years old and I never saw him again. My mother worked 3 jobs to feed us and I barely saw her either because she was always working. I wore the same clothes to school every week because we could not afford more. And kids like you made my life miserable every single day with your comments and your laughter and your casual cruelty." She walked closer to the students, and some of them shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "So yes, you will probably break me eventually. You will find my weaknesses because I have plenty of them. You will make me cry because I cry easily. You will add me to your list of victories and maybe you will even break some kind of record." She stopped directly in front of the boy who had been talking, standing so close he had to look up to meet her eyes. "But here is what makes me different from the other 23, she said, her voice dropping to almost a whisper that somehow filled the entire room. "I am not going anywhere. You can insult me and mock me and record me and post it online for the whole world to see. You can make my life a living hell in ways I have not even imagined yet, but I will come back tomorrow, and the next day, and the day after that, and the day after that." She straightened up and addressed the whole class, her voice growing stronger. "I have nothing to lose here, no reputation to protect because I do not come from your world, no pride to preserve because pride is a luxury I have never been able to afford. I have already lived through things that would break most people: poverty, abuse, neglect, homelessness. So do your worst, destroy me if you can, but I will still be here." The room was completely silent, and for the first time some of the students looked uncertain. Was this woman insane, or was she something else entirely, something they had never encountered before? The truth would shatter everything they thought they knew before the sun set on this day. The boy in the front row stared at her for 3 long seconds, and then he started a slow, mocking clap that echoed through the silent classroom like gunshots. His eyes were cold, calculating, and there was something almost predatory in the way he smiled at her. "Beautiful speech," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm that cut sharper than any knife. Teacher number 12 gave a similar one about never giving up and believing in us. She cried on day 2 when we posted screenshots of her dating profile online with comments about how desperate she looked. Let us see how long your bravery lasts when we dig into your life. He turned to face the class, his voice rising with command and authority that should not belong to someone so young. Everyone, take out your phones, document everything. Let us make this one memorable. I want recordings, screenshots, everything. We are going to find out who she really is, and then we are going to show the whole world. And that was when 17 phones rose into the air like weapons being drawn, all pointed directly at her face, and she understood in that moment exactly what kind of war she had just walked into. She looked at them all, her face remaining calm even though her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. "Fine," she said quietly, "but while you are recording I have a question for you." She walked to the whiteboard and picked up a marker, and in large letters that filled half the board she wrote 3 words, "Who hurt you?" The students looked at each other, confusion replacing some of their confidence, because this was not how the game was supposed to go. "What kind of stupid question is that?" a girl in the second row asked, and her voice was sharp and defensive. She had long blonde hair that fell in perfect waves, the kind of hair that required expensive salon visits and professional products, and her face looked like it had never smiled genuinely in her entire life. "Nobody hurt us. We are the ones who do the hurting. We are the ones with power." "Really?" the teacher asked, and there was no judgment in her voice, only genuine curiosity. "Because in my experience, people who enjoy causing pain are usually people who have experienced pain themselves. Happy people do not need to make others suffer to feel good. Secure people do not need to prove their power every single day." "You do not know anything about us," another student said angrily from the back of the room, a boy with dark hair and expensive headphones around his neck. "You just got here, you do not know our lives or our families or anything." "You are absolutely right," she replied, nodding in agreement. "I do not know anything about you, but I would like to, not your parents' names or your bank accounts or your social status. I want to know you, the real you, the person you are when nobody is watching and nobody is judging and you do not have to perform." The leader stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. His face was flushed with anger and his hands were clenched into fists at his sides. "This is ridiculous," he said, his voice rising. "Who do you think you are? Some kind of therapist? Some kind of savior? We do not need your psychology tricks. We do not need your pity. We do not need you." He grabbed his expensive leather bag and walked toward the door with long, angry strides. Several other students immediately stood up to follow him because that was how it worked in this classroom. Wherever the leader went, the others followed like shadows. "You are right," she said softly, but her voice somehow carried across the room and made him stop with his hand on the doorknob. "You do not need me." He turned around slowly, his face twisted with confusion and anger, because teachers were not supposed to agree with them. "But maybe," she continued, and now her voice was even softer, almost tender, "just maybe you want someone to stay. You want someone who will not run away when things get difficult. Someone who sees past the cruelty and the weapons you have built around yourselves to the person underneath who is just scared and alone." The boy's face flickered with something for just a moment, something that looked almost like pain or recognition or longing. His mouth opened slightly as if he was about to say something, and his eyes filled with an emotion he quickly tried to hide. Then it was gone, replaced by his usual cold, hard expression, the mask sliding back into place like armor. "You are delusional," he said, but his voice lacked some of its earlier conviction. "You are going to regret this." And he walked out, slamming the door behind him so hard the windows rattled. 7 students followed him without hesitation, their loyalty to their leader stronger than their curiosity about this strange new teacher who did not behave like any adult they had ever met. 10 remained in their seats, and the classroom felt different now, quieter, heavier with possibility and uncertainty. She looked at the 10 students who stayed, really looked at them, and she could see it now, the cracks in their armor, the uncertainty in their eyes. Some looked curious, their heads tilted slightly as they studied her like she was a puzzle they could not quite solve. Others looked skeptical, their arms crossed defensively across their chests. And one girl in the back was crying silently, tears running down her face that she tried to hide behind her long dark hair, her thin shoulders shaking slightly. "Well," the teacher said, and a small smile touched her lips. "That was dramatic. Now who wants to actually learn something today?" The next 3 weeks were absolutely brutal, worse than anything she had experienced in her 15 years of teaching, and there were nights when she lay in bed wondering if she had made a terrible mistake. The students who had walked out on the first day made it their personal mission to destroy her completely and utterly. They started rumors that she was having an affair with the principal, and soon the whole school was whispering about it in hallways and bathrooms. They hacked into her personal email account. She still did not know how they managed that, and printed out private messages for everyone to see. Messages to friends about her financial struggles and her loneliness and her doubts about herself. They called her at 3 in the morning with threatening voice messages that made her hands shake, voices disguised and distorted, saying things that made her afraid to walk to her car alone. They put glue on her chair so she sat in it during class and had to stand up with glue all over her dress while students laughed and recorded her humiliation. They hid her belongings so she spent hours searching for her car keys or her wallet or her phone. They wrote obscene things about her on bathroom walls throughout the school, things so vile that even the janitors looked at her with pity and discomfort. Every day she cleaned up their messes with shaking hands and tears burning behind her eyes. Every night she went home to her small apartment and cried alone on her bathroom floor, sobbing into a towel so her neighbors would not hear. But every morning she woke up, looked at herself in the mirror, took a deep breath, and came back to that classroom on the 3rd floor. The parents got involved in week 2, and that was when things escalated to a whole new level of nightmare. They filed formal complaints with the school board, thick documents filled with accusations. They accused her of bullying their children, of psychological abuse, of creating a hostile learning environment, of incompetence, of everything they could think of. They demanded she be fired immediately, and they threatened to sue the school for allowing her to remain in the classroom. The pressure on the principal became immense, crushing, unbearable. Bam, if you're still watching, I need you to hit that subscribe button right now, because what happens next is going to blow your mind. Drop a comment telling me if you think this teacher is going to survive, or if these students are finally going to break her like they broke all the others. And if this story is touching your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Now let's get back to the chaos, because the principal was about to call her into his office, and what he had to say would change everything. He called her into his office on a Friday afternoon, and when she walked in she could see the exhaustion carved into his face like someone had taken a knife and etched it into his skin. He looked like he had aged 10 years in 3 weeks. "The pressure is immense," he said, his voice hoarse and defeated. "These parents are threatening to pull their donations. That is millions of dollars, money that keeps this school running and pays salaries for dozens of teachers. The board is asking me to let you go." Actually, they are not asking anymore, they are demanding it. She sat quietly in the chair across from him, her hands folded in her lap, waiting for him to continue because she knew there was more. "I do not want to fire you," he continued, and she could hear the genuine regret in his voice. "You are doing something different, something I have never seen before, but I do not know how much longer I can protect you from this. The board meets on Monday and they are going to vote on your employment. I cannot stop them." "You warned me you could not protect me," she said calmly, even though her insides felt like they were being torn apart. "I did not expect you to. I knew what I was walking into. Just give me more time, please." "Time for what?" he asked desperately, spreading his hands wide on his desk. "They are not changing. If anything, they are getting worse. The complaints are multiplying. The parents are organizing. You cannot win this fight." "They are getting worse because they are scared," she said, and her voice was steady and certain. "Scared? Scared of what?" The principal looked at her like she had lost her mind. "They have all the power, they have all the money, what could they possibly be scared of?" Yeah. "Scared that I might actually see them, really see them, past all the money and the cruelty and the walls they have built. And that terrifies them more than anything else in the world, because if I see who they really are, then they might have to see it too." The principal shook his head slowly, clearly not understanding, but he said nothing more. She stood up and walked out, her back straight and her head high, even though she felt like she was falling apart inside. That afternoon, something unexpected happened that gave her the first real sign of hope since this nightmare began. The girl who had been crying silently on the first day was waiting outside her classroom when she arrived, standing against the wall with her arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to hold herself together. She was painfully skinny, all sharp angles and jutting bones, with dark circles under her eyes that makeup could not hide even though she had clearly tried. She came from one of the wealthiest families in the city. Her father was a famous surgeon whose face appeared in medical journals, and her mother was a former model-turned-businesswoman who owned a chain of boutiques. "Can I talk to you?" the girl asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper, and she looked around nervously as if she was afraid someone might see her. "Of course," the teacher said, unlocking the classroom door. "Come in." They sat together in the empty classroom, the girl perched on the edge of a desk and the teacher sitting in a student chair, so they were at the same level, so there was no hierarchy or power dynamic between them. "I do not want to do this anymore," the girl whispered, and her voice shook with emotion. "The bullying, the cruelty, the games we play with people's lives, I never wanted to be part of it in the first place." "Then why are you?" the teacher asked gently, without judgment, just genuine curiosity and concern. The girl's eyes filled with tears that spilled over and ran down her thin cheeks, leaving tracks through her carefully applied makeup. "Because if I am not the bully, I become the victim. That is how it works in this school, in this world we have created. You are either with them or against them, and if you are against them, they destroy you. They ruin your life and your reputation and everything you care about." "That sounds exhausting," the teacher said softly. The girl laughed, but it was a bitter, broken sound that held no humor at all. "It is. Every single day I wake up and I hate myself. I hate who I have become. I look in the mirror and I do not recognize the person staring back at me. But I do not know how to stop. I do not know how to get off this train even though I know it is heading toward a cliff." The teacher reached out and took the girl's hand, which was cold and trembling. "You just did," she said. "You just stopped. Right now, in this moment, you chose differently. You chose to come here and talk to me instead of joining them in tearing me apart." The girl cried harder, her whole body shaking with sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her, years of pain and fear and self-hatred pouring out all at once. "I am so tired," she sobbed, her voice breaking. "Everyone thinks my life is perfect because my parents are rich and successful. But my father has not spoken to me in 2 years unless it is about grades or my future or how I am representing the family. My mother only cares about how I look, what I wear, whether I am thin enough for her standards. I could disappear tomorrow and they would not notice until the maid told them I had not come home." The teacher held the girl while she cried, not offering advice or trying to fix anything, just being present, just staying, just letting this broken child know that someone cared enough to witness her pain. When the tears finally stopped and the girl sat there hiccuping and wiping her face with her sleeves, she looked up at the teacher with red, swollen eyes. "Why do you keep coming back?" she asked, and the question held genuine confusion and wonder. "Everyone else leaves. Every other teacher runs away as fast as they can. Why do you stay?" The teacher thought carefully before answering because she knew this moment mattered, that what she said now could change the trajectory of this girl's entire life. "Because when I was your age, I was drowning. I was sinking beneath waves of anger and pain and self-destruction, and everyone just watched. They saw me sinking and they walked away because it was easier than trying to help. Teachers, family, friends, everyone." She paused, lost in the memory of that dark time. "Except one person, one teacher who refused to give up on me even when I gave her every reason to. She saw past my anger and my cruelty. She saw a scared little girl who just wanted someone to care, someone to fight for her, someone to believe she was worth saving. And she stayed. She stayed until I believed I was worth staying for." She looked at the girl with intense sincerity, her eyes holding the girl's gaze. "I am staying because maybe one of you needs what I needed. Maybe one of you is drowning and just waiting for someone to reach out their hand. And even if I cannot save everyone, if I can reach just one person, it will be worth every insult, every rumor, every sleepless night, every moment of humiliation." The girl stared at her for a long moment, and something shifted in her expression, something like hope beginning to bloom in a place where hope had died long ago. "What if they hurt you really bad?" she whispered, her voice filled with fear. "What if they do something you cannot recover from, something that destroys your whole life?" The teacher smiled sadly, and there was something almost peaceful in her expression. "Then at least I will know I tried, at least I will know I did not run away when it mattered most." The next day, everything shifted in ways no one could have predicted, and the cracks in the group's unity began to show. The girl who had talked to the teacher did not participate in the bullying anymore. When the other students made cruel comments in class, she stayed silent and looked down at her desk. When they planned pranks during lunch, she walked away without explanation. When they tried to get her to sign fake complaints against the teacher, she refused. The other students noticed immediately, because in their world, even the smallest deviation from the group was a threat to their collective power. "What is wrong with you?" the leader asked her harshly during lunch, cornering her against a row of lockers while his followers gathered around like wolves circling prey. "You have been acting strange. You barely talk to us anymore. You did not sign the complaint we drafted last night." "I am just tired," she said, but her voice lacked conviction and they could all hear it. "Tired of what?" "Tired of being part of the winning team, tired of having power." His voice was sharp and dangerous. She looked at him, really looked at him for the first time in years, and she saw past his confident exterior to the fear underneath, the terror of losing control, the desperation to maintain his position at the top of this cruel hierarchy. "We are not winning anything," she said quietly but firmly. "We are just hiding from our pain by causing pain to others, and I do not want to hide anymore." His face twisted with rage and something else, something that looked almost like panic. "You talked to her, did you not? That teacher. She got into your head with her psychology tricks and her fake empathy." "She listened to me," the girl said, and her voice grew stronger. "She actually listened when I talked. That is more than anyone else has ever done, including you, including my parents, including everyone in my life." He stepped closer, invading her personal space, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper that sent chills down her spine. "If you turn on us, you know what will happen. We will destroy you. Everything, your reputation, your social life, your future. We will make sure everyone knows every secret you have ever told us. You will be nothing. You will be alone. You will be the victim you were so afraid of becoming." She should have been scared. A week ago she would have backed down immediately, would have apologized and begged for forgiveness and promised to never betray the group again. But something had changed inside her, something fundamental and unbreakable. "Then do it," she said, meeting his eyes without flinching. "I am already nothing. I have been nothing for years, just a puppet doing whatever you all wanted. At least this way I will be nothing with a clear conscience. At least this way I can look at myself in the mirror without wanting to cry." She walked away, leaving him standing there with his followers. His face a mask of rage and confusion and something that might have been respect, though he would never admit it. That afternoon, something even more unexpected happened. Two more students came to talk to the teacher, knocking hesitantly on her classroom door after school when the hallways were mostly empty. They were twin brothers, impossible to tell apart with their identical faces and matching expensive clothes, sons of a powerful politician whose campaign posters appeared on every street corner during election season. They had reputations as the cruelest members of the group, the ones who came up with the most devastating pranks and the most cutting insults. They had personally driven 3 teachers to quit with carefully orchestrated campaigns of psychological warfare. But sitting in her classroom after school with the afternoon sun streaming through the windows, they looked like scared little boys who had forgotten how to be children. "Our father hits us," one of them said, his voice flat and emotionless like he was reporting the weather. "When we bring home anything less than perfect grades, when we embarrass him in public, when we fail to live up to his expectations of what his sons should be. He tells us we are worthless," the other added, and his voice cracked slightly. "That we will never amount to anything, that we are disappointments to the family name, that he wishes we had never been born. So we come to school and we make other people feel worthless," the first boy continued, and now emotion was creeping into his voice. "Because at least here we have power, at least here we are not the weak ones, at least here we can make someone else cry instead of crying ourselves." But would the teacher's compassion be enough to save them, or was she about to discover that some wounds run too deep to ever heal? What she was about to learn would test everything she believed about redemption and second chances. The teacher listened to the twin brothers without judgment, without shock, without any of the reactions that adults usually had when children revealed the dark truths of their lives. She just listened, and in that listening she gave them something they had never experienced before, the gift of being heard without having to perform or pretend or hide. "Hurting others does not make the pain go away," she said gently when they finished speaking, and her voice was filled with a tenderness that made one of the twins look away because he was not used to kindness, and it made his eyes burn with tears he refused to shed. "It just spreads it around. It just creates more broken people who will go out and break others. It is a cycle that never ends unless someone chooses to stop it." "We know," one twin said, and his voice was barely audible. "But we do not know how else to cope. We do not know how to deal with the anger and the shame and the fear. Hurting others is the only thing that makes us feel powerful, even if it is just for a moment." "Would you like to learn a different way?" the teacher asked, leaning forward slightly. Would you like to learn how to be powerful without destroying others, how to be strong without being cruel? The twins looked at each other with an entire conversation happening in that glance, years of shared pain and shared survival and shared guilt passing between them in seconds. Then they looked back at her and both of them nodded slowly. Will you teach us? One asked, and the vulnerability in his voice was almost unbearable to witness. If you are willing to learn, she replied. If you are willing to do the hard work of changing even when it feels impossible. For the first time in years, possibly for the first time since they were small children before their father's expectations crushed their spirits, the twins smiled genuine smiles that reached their eyes and transformed their faces from masks of cruelty into something recognizably human and young and hopeful. Word spread quickly among the students over the following days, carried on whispers and glances and the subtle shifts in classroom dynamics that teenagers notice even when adults miss them. The teacher was not like the others who had come before. She did not yell or threaten or try to control them with authority that they could easily undermine. She did not try to win them over with friendliness or bribery or lowered expectations. She just listened with her whole attention. She stayed when any reasonable person would have run, and slowly, impossibly, she started to break through the walls they had spent years building around their hearts. Over the following weeks, more students came to her one by one, each one carrying a different burden that they had hidden beneath designer clothes and expensive accessories and carefully constructed images of perfection. One girl, who always wore long sleeves even in summer, finally rolled them up to show the teacher scars that crisscrossed her forearms like a map of pain, and she explained through tears that her mother had died of cancer 2 years ago, and her father had remarried within 6 months to a woman who treated her like a servant in her own home, making her clean and cook and disappear whenever guests came over, because she was an inconvenient reminder of his first wife. One boy, whose parents were going through a vicious divorce, explained how they used him as a weapon against each other, each one trying to turn him against the other parent, each one interrogating him about what happened at the other's house, each one buying his loyalty with expensive gifts that felt like bribes, and he said he felt like he was being torn in half and nobody cared about the pain because they were too focused on hurting each other. Another student, a girl who was always perfectly dressed and perfectly made up and perfectly poised, finally admitted that she had an eating disorder that had started when her mother commented on her weight at a family dinner 3 years ago, and now she could not stop counting calories and measuring her body and hatting herself for every bite of food she put in her mouth, and nobody at home noticed because they were too busy with their own lives to see that she was slowly disappearing. A boy whose family had immigrated from another country revealed that his parents put unbearable pressure on him to succeed because they had sacrificed everything to give him opportunities they never had, and he was terrified of disappointing them, so terrified that he could not sleep at night and his hands shook during tests, and he had panic attacks in bathroom stalls between classes. These were not evil children, the teacher realized as she listened to story after story of neglect and pressure and pain. They were broken children who had everything money could buy and nothing that money could not: love, attention, genuine connection, safety. Someone who saw them as more than extensions of their parents' ambitions or symbols of their parents' success. They had learned to weaponize their pain because it was the only way they knew how to feel powerful in lives where they felt utterly powerless. But the leader of the group, the boy who had challenged her on that first day, refused to bend or break or show any sign of vulnerability. He watched as his followers slowly drifted away from him like sand slipping through fingers, and he watched as the teacher gained their trust through nothing more than patience and presence and radical acceptance. And he plotted his revenge with the cold calculation of someone who had learned early that in his world, you either destroyed your enemies or they destroyed you. Hey my people, we are at the turning point of this story, and I need you to stay with me because what happens next is absolutely wild. If you're feeling this journey, drop a like right now and comment whether you think this teacher is going to survive what is coming. Share this with someone who needs to hear a story about hope and resilience, and do not forget to subscribe because you do not want to miss how this unfolds. Now let us get back to the story, because the leader was about to make a move that would either destroy the teacher forever or reveal something that would change everything. One morning in late October, when autumn had painted the trees outside in shades of gold and crimson and the air had turned crisp and cold, the teacher arrived at school to find police cars in the parking lot, their lights flashing red and blue against the gray morning sky. Her heart sank immediately, dropping into her stomach like a stone into deep water, because she knew with absolute certainty that whatever was happening involved her. The principal met her at the entrance and his face was grave, lined with stress and exhaustion and something that might have been sympathy or might have been resignation. There has been an accusation, he said, and his voice was heavy with implications. A serious accusation. A student claims you assaulted them yesterday after school, pushed them against a wall, grabbed their arm hard enough to leave bruises, threatened them if they told anyone. "That is a lie," she said calmly, even though her heart was racing and her hands wanted to shake. "I have never touched a student inappropriately. I have never threatened anyone." "I know," he said quietly, and she could hear that he genuinely believed her. "I know you would not do that, but the student's father is a very powerful attorney and he is demanding a full investigation. He has already contacted the school board and the local news stations. He is threatening to sue the school for negligence and to press criminal charges against you personally." "Who made the accusation?" she asked, though she already knew the answer before he spoke it. "I cannot tell you that officially," the principal said, looking away, "but you can probably guess." She looked past him through the glass doors and saw the leader standing in the hallway with his father, a tall man in an expensive suit who radiated the kind of power that came from years of winning battles in courtrooms and boardrooms. The boy was talking animatedly, pointing and gesturing, and his father was nodding with a grim expression that promised consequences for everyone involved. When the leader's eyes met hers through the glass, she saw something in his face that made her heart break, not triumph or satisfaction but desperation and fear, the look of someone who was drowning and grabbing onto anything to stay afloat, even if it meant pulling others down with him. "You are suspended pending the outcome of the investigation," the principal continued, and she could hear how much it pained him to say these words. "You cannot come to school, you cannot contact any students, you cannot be on school property. I am sorry, but my hands are tied. The board met in an emergency session this morning and they voted unanimously to suspend you immediately." She nodded slowly, absorbing this information, feeling the weight of it settle over her like a heavy blanket. She had known something like this was coming. The leader had been too quiet lately, too watchful, clearly planning something devastating, but knowing it was coming and experiencing it were two entirely different things. "How long?" she asked. "The investigation could take weeks, maybe longer if he presses criminal charges, and even if you are cleared, the board may decide it is too risky to keep you employed here. The parents are already calling for your termination. The pressure is immense." She looked at him steadily. "Thank you for believing me." "I wish belief was enough," he said sadly, "but in this world power matters more than truth." She packed her bag slowly, deliberately, taking her time even though she knew people were watching and waiting for her to leave. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her run or cry or fall apart. She walked through the hallways with her head high and her back straight, and as she passed students and teachers, she could hear the whispers following her like a wave, rumors already spreading like wildfire through the school about what she had supposedly done. But as she walked toward the exit, something remarkable happened that she would remember for the rest of her life. The girl she had first talked to, the one who had cried in her classroom and admitted she hated who she had become, stepped in front of her, blocking her path to the door. "Wait," the girl said, and her voice was clear and strong, no longer the whisper of someone who was afraid of being noticed. Then the twins joined her, standing on either side, forming a human barrier between the teacher and the exit. Then another student stepped forward, and another, and another. Within minutes, 10 students stood in a line across the hallway, their faces determined, their bodies tense with the kind of courage that comes from deciding that doing the right thing matters more than staying safe. "What are you doing?" the leader shouted from across the hallway, and his voice cracked with something that sounded like panic. "Get out of the way. She assaulted me. She is dangerous. You are protecting someone who hurt me." "No," the first girl said firmly, and she looked directly at him without flinching. "She did not do anything wrong. You made it all up. You are lying because you are scared of losing control." "You cannot prove that," he said, but his voice lacked conviction now and everyone could hear it. "Yes, we can," she replied, and she held up her phone for everyone to see. "I recorded you planning this yesterday in the library. I recorded you telling your father exactly what lie you were going to tell. I recorded you coaching yourself on how to make fake bruises look real. I have everything." Yeah. The color drained from the leader's face so quickly that he actually swayed slightly on his feet, and his father grabbed his arm to steady him, looking between his son and the girl with an expression of growing horror and understanding. "You would not dare," the leader said, but now his voice was small and frightened, the voice of a child who knew he had been caught. "My father will destroy you, your whole family. He will make sure you never get into a good college. He will ruin your future." "Your father will be too busy dealing with his own problems," one of the twins said, stepping forward with his own phone raised. "Because we have recordings too. Recordings of all the things we have done over the past 2 years, every prank, every threat, every cruel thing we said and did, every teacher we drove away, every lie we told. And we are ready to show the school board everything if you do not admit right now that you made this up. The leader looked around desperately, searching for support, for allies, for anyone who would stand with him. But all his followers had abandoned him, and he stood alone in the hallway with his father and his lies and the crumbling remains of his power. "Why?" he asked, and his voice broke completely, tears starting to stream down his face even though he tried to hold them back. "Why are you doing this to me? I thought we were a team, I thought you were with me." The first girl stepped forward and her face was sad but resolute. "Because she taught us something. She taught us that hurting others does not make us strong, it makes us weak. She taught us that real power comes from being honest and vulnerable and choosing to do the right thing even when it is hard, and we are tired of being weak. We are tired of hiding behind cruelty and lies." The principal stood frozen, watching the scene unfold with wide eyes, clearly not knowing how to intervene or whether he should intervene or what any of this meant for his school and his career, and his ability to manage the impossible situation he had been placed in. "I believe an apology is owed," he finally said, looking at the leader with an expression that was stern and disappointed and almost parental. "To this teacher and to everyone you have hurt with your lies." The boy's face contorted with rage, then despair, then something else entirely, something that looked almost like relief, as if some enormous weight had been lifted from his shoulders. And then, to everyone's absolute shock, he started to cry in earnest, not the careful tears of someone trying to manipulate a situation, but the messy, ugly crying of someone whose entire world had just collapsed, and who did not know how to hold himself together anymore. "I am sorry," he sobbed, his voice barely intelligible through the tears and the gasping breaths. "I am sorry, I am so sorry, I did not know what else to do. I was losing everything and I was scared and I—" His words dissolved into incoherent crying and he sank down to the floor right there in the hallway, his expensive clothes crumpling, his carefully maintained image shattering into 1,000 pieces. His father stared at him with an expression that cycled through anger, confusion, disappointment, and finally something that might have been recognition, as if he was seeing his son clearly for the first time in years and not liking what that vision revealed about his own parenting and his own choices and his own failures. The teacher walked slowly toward the crying boy and knelt down beside him on the cold floor, not caring that people were watching or recording or that this moment would define how people remembered this entire situation. She reached out and placed a gentle hand on his shaking shoulder. "It is okay," she said softly. "You are going to be okay." "How can you say that?" he gasped between sobs. "I tried to destroy you, I lied about you, I tried to get you arrested. Why are you being nice to me?" "Because you are not a monster," she said, and her voice was filled with absolute certainty. "You are a scared child who learned to use cruelty as armor, and I know what that feels like because I was you once. I was angry and scared and desperate for control, but someone showed me that there was another way, and now I am showing you." He looked up at her with red, swollen eyes, his face streaked with tears and snot and all the ugly reality of genuine emotion. "I do not deserve your kindness," he whispered. "Maybe not," she agreed, "but I am giving it to you anyway because that is what it means to break the cycle. Someone has to choose grace even when it is not deserved. Someone has to choose compassion even when it is not earned." The hallway was completely silent now, everyone watching this moment unfold, and the weight of it hung in the air like something sacred and terrible and transformative all at once. The investigation was dropped that same day when the leader admitted to his lies in front of his father, and the principal and the school board members who had rushed to the school when they heard about the recordings. The evidence the students had collected was presented in a closed session, and for the first time the parents saw what their children had really been doing, saw the full scope of the psychological warfare and the calculated cruelty, and the systematic destruction of adult authority figures. Some parents were genuinely horrified, their faces pale with shock as they watched video after video of their children's cruelty. Others tried to make excuses, saying boys will be boys or kids make mistakes or everyone was overreacting. But the evidence was undeniable, recorded in high definition on expensive phones, time-stamped and geotagged and impossible to explain away. Changes were mandated by the school board. Professional counselors were brought in, not the school counselor who was overwhelmed and underfunded, but actual trauma therapists who specialized in working with troubled teenagers. Students were required to attend mandatory therapy sessions, individual and group, to address the underlying issues that had created this toxic environment. Parents were held accountable through mandatory family counseling sessions and educational workshops about the psychological impact of neglect and pressure on children. But the most important change happened in that classroom on the third floor, in the hearts and minds of the students who had learned that another way was possible. The leader, whose name was Marcus, though everyone had called him by his last name for so long that many students had forgotten his first name existed, did not come to school for 2 weeks after his public breakdown. The rumors said he was in intensive therapy, or that his parents had sent him away to a boarding school, or that he had been hospitalized for a mental health crisis. No one knew for sure, and the mystery of his absence hung over the school like a question no one knew how to answer. When he finally returned, he was a different person, or maybe he was the same person he had always been underneath the armor, finally visible now that the armor had been stripped away. He was quiet, withdrawn, moving through the hallways like a ghost, avoiding eye contact with everyone. He ate lunch alone in corners of the cafeteria where nobody usually sat. He did not speak in class unless directly asked a question. The transformation was so complete that some students wondered if this was really the same person who had ruled the school with fear and intimidation just weeks earlier. The teacher found him sitting alone in the cafeteria one afternoon during her free period, staring at nothing, his lunch untouched in front of him. She sat down across from him without asking permission, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. "I do not need your pity," Marcus finally said without looking up, his voice flat and emotionless. "Good," she replied calmly, "because I am not offering pity. Pity implies that I think you are less than me, that I am looking down on you from some position of moral superiority, and I do not feel that way at all." He finally met her eyes, and she could see the exhaustion in them, the kind of bone-deep weariness that came from carrying too much for too long. "What do you want then?" "To understand," she said simply. "You fought so hard to drive me away, you planned something that could have sent me to jail and ruined my entire life. I want to understand why. What was it about me staying that scared you so much?" He was silent for a long moment, his hands clenching and unclenching on the table in front of him. When he finally spoke, his voice was so quiet she had to lean forward to hear him. "Because you scared me more than anyone ever has," he admitted, and the honesty in his voice was raw and painful to hear. "Every other teacher either tried to control us through authority, which never worked because we had more power than they did, or they ran away when things got difficult. But you just stayed. You did not fight back when we attacked you. You did not break when we tried to break you. You just kept coming back day after day like you actually cared about us even though we gave you every reason not to." "And that scared you?" she asked gently. "It terrified me," he said, and now his voice shook slightly. "Because it meant you saw things, you saw through the image I had built. You saw past the power and the cruelty to whatever was underneath. And I did not want to be seen. I have spent my whole life hiding behind money and status and fear. It is all I know. It is the only way I know how to survive." "What are you hiding from?" she asked, though she thought she already knew the answer. But what Marcus revealed next would shake everything she thought she understood about him and about the price of perfection. The truth was more devastating than anyone could have imagined. Marcus's eyes filled with tears that he desperately tried to blink away, but they came anyway, spilling over and running down his cheeks in rivers of pain that had been dammed up for years. "My father tells me every single day that I am his greatest achievement," he said, and his voice cracked on every other word. "His legacy, his perfect son, the one who will carry on the family name and exceed everything he has accomplished. He tells everyone we meet about my grades, my achievements, my future. He has my whole life planned out, the college I will attend, the law school after that, the firm I will join, the partnerships I will make, even the kind of woman I should eventually marry." He paused, his hands trembling violently on the table. "But I am not perfect, I am not even close. I am angry all the time, this rage burning inside me that I do not know how to control. I hate myself so much that some mornings I cannot even look in the mirror without wanting to break it. I lay awake at night thinking about all the horrible things I have done, all the people I have hurt, all the teachers whose lives I ruined, and the guilt crushes me until I cannot breathe. And I cannot tell anyone because I am supposed to be perfect. I am supposed to be the golden child who never struggles, who never doubts, who never fails." The teacher reached across the table and took his hand, and he did not pull away even though he looked shocked by the gesture. "That sounds incredibly lonely," she said softly. "It is," he whispered, and his voice broke completely. "It is so lonely that sometimes I think about just disappearing, just running away, or worse, just so I do not have to pretend anymore. I have everything anyone could want, money, status, a future that is guaranteed, but I feel empty inside, like there is this huge hole where something important should be, and I do not even know what is missing." "Connection," the teacher said gently. "Love that is not conditional on your performance. Acceptance of who you really are, not who people want you to be, the freedom to be imperfect and still be valued." He sobbed openly now, not caring who saw or heard, all the years of carefully maintained control dissolving like sand in water. I do not even know who I really am, he gasped. I have been performing for so long that I do not know where the performance ends and the real person begins. What if there is nothing underneath? What if I take off all the masks and there is just emptiness? There is not emptiness, she said with absolute certainty. I have seen you, Marcus, the real you, in that moment when you broke down in the hallway, when all your defenses crumbled and you were just a scared kid crying on the floor. That was real. That was you, vulnerable and scared and human. And that person is worth knowing. That person is worth saving. How do you know? He asked desperately. How can you be sure? Because I changed, she replied. I was just like you once, maybe worse. I was so full of rage and pain that I wanted everyone around me to hurt the way I was hurting. I destroyed relationships and pushed away anyone who tried to help and convinced myself that I was worthless and that nothing could ever get better. But someone showed me a different way. Someone refused to give up on me. And slowly, painfully, I learned that I could be different, that I could choose compassion instead of cruelty. That I could be real instead of perfect. Marcus cried for a long time while the teacher held his hand, and the cafeteria slowly emptied around them as lunch period ended and students filtered out to their next classes. No one interrupted them. No one took pictures or recorded videos. Something about the sacredness of the moment made even the most cynical students keep their distance and their silence. When his tears finally slowed, Marcus looked up at her with red, swollen eyes. I do not know how to be different, he admitted. I do not know how to stop being the person I have been for so long. It starts with one choice, she said. One moment where you decide to act differently than you have before, and then another choice, and another, until slowly those choices become habits and those habits become who you are. Will you help me? He asked, and the vulnerability in his voice was almost unbearable. Every step of the way, she promised, for as long as it takes. The weeks that followed were transformative in ways that no one could have predicted, and the classroom on the third floor became something it had never been before, a place of healing instead of harm, a sanctuary instead of a battlefield. Marcus started small, with apologies that were awkward and halting but genuine. He found the teachers he had driven away over the years, tracking down their email addresses and phone numbers, and he wrote letters expressing remorse that took him hours to compose because he wanted to get the words exactly right. Some teachers responded with forgiveness. Others did not respond at all, and he had to learn to sit with that rejection and understand that some wounds could not be healed with words alone. One teacher, the woman who had quit on her fourth day, actually came back to the school to meet with him in person, and they talked for 2 hours in an empty classroom while he cried and apologized, and she listened with a grace that left him humbled. He started sitting with the other students who had begun meeting with the teacher after school. Group sessions where they talked about their pain and their fears and their struggles to be different than they had been. At first he barely spoke, just listened as others shared their stories. But gradually he began to open up, revealing pieces of himself that he had kept hidden his entire life, his fear of disappointing his father, his anxiety that kept him awake at night, his terror that without his armor of cruelty he would be vulnerable and weak. The other students responded with surprising compassion because they understood in ways that adults often could not. They had all worn masks. They had all hidden behind cruelty. They had all been terrified of being truly seen, and now they were learning together how to be real, how to be vulnerable, how to be kind to themselves and each other. Hey fam, I need you to pause for just a second because this story is building to something massive. If your heart is in this journey with these broken kids finding healing, drop a like and let me know in the comments which character's transformation is hitting you the hardest. Share this with someone who needs to hear that change is possible, that no one is too far gone to be redeemed. Subscribe if you have not already, because episode 5 is going to leave you speechless. Now let us get back to it, because something was about to happen that would test everything they had learned. The girl who had first come to talk to the teacher, whose name was Sarah, started a peer counseling program with the teacher's guidance. She recruited other students who had been through the transformation, and together they created a safe space for kids who were struggling with family issues or mental health or the crushing pressure to be perfect. The program started with just a handful of students meeting in a classroom after school, but within weeks it grew to over 30 students from across the school, all looking for a place where they could be honest about their pain without judgment. The twins, whose names were David and Daniel, raised money for mental health awareness by organizing a school-wide event where students could share their stories through art and music and spoken word poetry. They performed together, reading a piece they had written about living with abuse and learning to find their voices, and there was not a dry eye in the auditorium when they finished. Their father was there, sitting in the back row, and afterward he came up to them with tears streaming down his face and said 6 words that changed everything. "I am so sorry, please help me change." They started family therapy the following week, and it was brutally hard and painfully honest, but for the first time in their lives, they felt like maybe their home could become a place of safety instead of fear. The school itself began to change as word spread about what was happening in that classroom on the third floor. Other teachers started adopting similar approaches, focusing on listening and understanding instead of just discipline and control. Parents began attending the mandatory workshops and actually learning about the psychological needs of teenagers instead of just dismissing the sessions as unnecessary interference. The toxic culture that had poisoned the school for years began to slowly, gradually shift toward something healthier and more human. But not everyone was ready to change, and not all wounds could be healed so easily. Marcus's father, a man named Richard Thornton, who was one of the most successful attorneys in the state, did not respond well to his son's transformation. He saw Marcus's newfound vulnerability as weakness, his apologies as admissions of failure, his therapy as evidence that his perfect son was broken beyond repair. He increased the pressure on Marcus, demanding even better grades, even more impressive achievements, even more proof that the Thornton name would be carried forward with excellence and distinction. One evening in late November, when winter was beginning to tighten its grip on the city and darkness came early, Marcus came to school the next morning with bruises on his wrist that he tried to hide under his sleeves. Sarah noticed during their peer counseling session and she gently asked him about it. At first, he made excuses. He had bumped into a door, he had fallen during basketball practice, it was nothing to worry about. But she kept pressing with the quiet persistence of someone who knew what it was like to hide painful truths, and finally he broke down and admitted what had happened. His father had found his therapy journal, the one where Marcus had been writing about his feelings and his struggles and his journey toward becoming a better person. Richard had read it and he had been furious, not at himself for the pressure he had put on his son, but at Marcus for being weak enough to need therapy, for embarrassing the family, for failing to live up to the Thornton legacy. The argument had escalated and Richard had grabbed Marcus's wrist hard enough to leave marks, shouting that he was raising a man, not a coward, that winners did not need therapy, that Marcus was destroying everything Richard had worked for. Sarah immediately told the teacher, and the teacher contacted the school counselor and the appropriate authorities, because this was not something that could be handled quietly or internally. Child Protective Services got involved, conducting interviews and home visits and assessments. Richard Thornton was furious, hearing expensive lawyers and threatening lawsuits and trying to use his connections to make the whole situation disappear. But the evidence was clear, documented in photographs and testimony, and the bruises on Marcus's wrist, and even power and money could not erase that reality completely. Marcus was placed temporarily with his aunt, his mother's sister, who lived across the city, while the investigation continued. His mother, who had been largely absent from his life despite living in the same house, finally had to confront what her husband had been doing to their son and what her own emotional distance had cost. She filed for separation, moved into a hotel with Marcus, and started her own therapy to understand how she had allowed this situation to develop and what she needed to do differently. The whole situation was messy and painful, and complicated in the way that real life always is, with no clean resolutions or easy answers. But Marcus was safe, and he was beginning to understand that his father's definition of strength had been wrong all along, that real strength came from being honest about your pain and asking for help and choosing to be vulnerable even when it was terrifying. Through all of this chaos, the teacher remained a constant presence, showing up day after day, providing stability and support and unconditional acceptance. She checked in with Marcus daily, not as a teacher checking on a student's academic progress, but as one human being making sure another human being was okay. She attended his therapy sessions when he asked her to, providing context and perspective and reassurance. She stood beside him during meetings with Child Protective Services, advocating for his needs and his safety. And she did the same for every other student who needed her, because her commitment had never been just to one child but to all of them, to every broken kid who walked into her classroom carrying burdens too heavy for their young shoulders. The classroom on the third floor became legendary, not for the teachers it had destroyed but for the students it had saved. Other schools heard about what was happening and reached out, asking for advice and guidance and training. The teacher started leading workshops for educators about trauma-informed teaching and the importance of seeing students as whole people rather than just test scores or behavior problems. The students who had been part of the transformation started speaking at other schools, sharing their stories with brutal honesty and inspiring other teenagers to believe that change was possible. On the last day before winter break, the students gathered in the classroom one final time before the holiday, and they had prepared something special that they had been working on in secret for weeks. One by one, each student stood and spoke, sharing what the teacher had meant to them and how she had changed their lives. Sarah went first, her voice steady and clear. You taught me that it is okay to be vulnerable, that asking for help is not weakness but courage. You taught me that I do not have to be perfect to be worthy of love and acceptance. David stood next. You taught me that my parents' mistakes do not have to define who I become. You taught me that I have a choice in the kind of person I want to be. Daniel followed his twin. You taught me that anger can be transformed into something constructive instead of destructive. You taught me that my pain does not have to become someone else's pain. One by one, the others shared their own testimonies about learning that their parents' money did not define their worth, about discovering that they could care about others without losing themselves, about understanding that true power came from lifting others up instead of tearing them down, about finding hope in places where they thought only darkness existed. Marcus went last, and he stood in front of the class for a long moment before speaking, gathering his courage and his words. You taught me the most important lesson of all, he finally said, and his voice was thick with emotion. You taught me that someone can care about me without wanting anything in return, that love does not have to be earned through performance or achievement or perfection. You stayed when everyone else left. You saw me when I was trying to be invisible. You held on when I tried to push you away. He paused, tears streaming down his face. I tried to destroy you, I lied about you, I could have sent you to jail and ruined your entire life, and you forgave me, not because I deserved it but because that is who you are. You showed me what grace looks like and it changed everything. When all the students had finished sharing, Sarah stood up and walked to the front of the room, holding a small wooden box that they had all contributed to creating. We have something for you, she said, handing the box to the teacher with trembling hands. Inside were 17 letters, one from each student, handwritten on beautiful paper, sharing in detail how she had changed their lives and what she meant to them. Also inside was a small pendant shaped like an anchor, delicate and beautiful, made of silver that caught the light. Because you anchored us, Sarah explained, and her voice broke with emotion. When we were drifting in darkness, when we were lost and drowning and destroying ourselves and everyone around us, you held on. You would not let us float away. You stayed and stayed and stayed until we finally believed we were worth staying for. The teacher held the pendant in her hands, and tears streamed down her face as she looked at these 17 children who had been broken and were now healing, who had been weapons and were now becoming helpers, who had been lost and were now finding their way home to themselves. I did not save you, she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. You saved yourselves, I just refused to leave. All I did was stay and believe in you when you could not believe in yourselves. Marcus stepped forward and the other students parted to let him through. He stood in front of the teacher, this boy who had once tried to destroy her, this child who had been drowning in his father's impossible expectations and his own self-hatred, and he looked at her with eyes that held genuine gratitude and something that looked like peace. You were right, he said, on that first day. When you asked who hurt us and when you said maybe we wanted someone to stay, we did, we desperately did, we just did not know how to ask because asking meant admitting we were not the powerful, untouchable people we pretended to be. Asking meant being vulnerable, and vulnerability was the scariest thing in the world. She pulled him into a hug and he held on tight, crying into her shoulder like the child he had never been allowed to be. The other students joined them, creating a circle of bodies and arms and shared humanity, all of them holding each other up the way they had learned to do over these transformative months. As they stood there together, the winter sun streaming through the windows and casting golden light across their faces, the teacher thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. 23 teachers had walked away from this classroom. She had stayed, and in staying she had witnessed miracles, not the kind of miracles that happen in an instant with bright light and trumpets, but the slow, painful, beautiful kind of miracles that happen when broken people chose to do the hard work of healing. The classroom on the third floor was no longer feared by teachers. It was no longer a place where educators went to have their spirits broken and their careers destroyed. It had become something sacred, a place of transformation, a place where children learned that they could be more than their worst moments, a place where hope grew in soil that had been poisoned for years. And the teacher who made it happen never forgot the lesson she had learned so many years ago from her own teacher, the woman who had refused to give up on an angry, cruel, broken girl who thought she was beyond saving. Sometimes the students who are hardest to love are the ones who need love the most. Sometimes the children who cause the most pain are the ones who are in the most pain. And sometimes all it takes is one person who refuses to give up. One person who stays when everyone else leaves, one person who believes that redemption is possible even when all the evidence suggests otherwise. But as the winter break approached and the students prepared to go home to families that were still complicated and painful and imperfect, a shadow was forming on the horizon that would test everything they had learned and everything they had become. Because not everyone believed that change was possible, not everyone wanted these students to heal. And someone was planning something that would either destroy all the progress they had made or prove once and for all that their transformation was real and lasting. Would the bonds they had formed be strong enough to survive what was coming, or would they shatter under pressure and return to the broken people they had been before? The answer would come in the darkest hour, when everything they believed about themselves would be put to the ultimate test. The first warning came on a Tuesday morning in early January, when the students returned from winter break, and the school was still decorated with fatting holiday decorations that no one had bothered to take down yet. Sarah found an envelope taped to her locker, her name written across the front in handwriting she did not recognize, and when she opened it with trembling fingers, a single photograph fell out. It was a picture of her from 2 years ago at a party she had tried to forget, doing things she was ashamed of, surrounded by people she no longer associated with. Across the bottom, someone had written in red ink, "Remember who you really are, leopards don't change their spots." She immediately showed it to Marcus, who had become something like a protective older brother to the group despite being the same age, and his face went pale when he saw the photograph. "This is not random," he said, his voice tight with tension. "Someone is targeting us, someone wants to remind us of who we used to be to make us doubt our transformation." Within hours, more envelopes appeared. David found one in his gym bag containing a printed transcript of text messages he had sent to other students 2 years ago, messages filled with cruel threats and manipulation, messages that made him feel sick to read now because they were written in his voice but by a person he no longer recognized. Daniel discovered one tucked inside his history textbook, containing a video file on a USB drive. When he plugged it into a computer, it showed him and his brother tormenting a younger student in a bathroom, their laughter echoing as the child cried and begged them to stop. Every student who had been part of the transformation received something: photographs, videos, screenshots, printed messages, all evidence of their past cruelty, all carefully selected to inflict maximum psychological damage. The message was clear. You cannot escape who you were, your past will always define you, redemption is an illusion, and everyone will know the truth about the monsters you really are. The teacher found them gathered in her classroom after school, 17 students sitting in a circle with their envelopes and evidence spread out before them like accusations at a trial. The energy in the room was different from anything she had felt in months, heavy, dark, suffocating with shame and fear, and the creeping suspicion that maybe they had been fooling themselves all along. Maybe change was not really possible. Maybe they were exactly who these photographs and videos said they were. "Someone is trying to destroy us," Sarah said, and her voice shook despite her efforts to sound strong. "Someone wants to take everything we have built and tear it down. They want to prove that we are still the horrible people we used to be." "We are those people," Daniel said quietly, staring at his hands. "These pictures and videos, they are real. We did those things, we hurt those people. Maybe whoever is doing this is right. Maybe we do not deserve a second chance." "No," the teacher said firmly, standing in the center of their circle. "Whoever is doing this wants you to believe that your past defines your future, that one version of yourself is the only true version. But that is not how human beings work. You are not static creatures frozen in time. You are capable of growth and change and becoming better than you were." "But we did do those things," Marcus said, and his face was twisted with anguish. "We cannot undo them, we cannot erase the pain we caused. Those victims, they still carry the wounds we gave them. How can we claim to be different when the evidence of who we were is right here in front of us?" "You are different because you acknowledge what you did instead of denying it," the teacher replied. "You are different because you feel genuine remorse instead of justifying your actions. You are different because you have spent months doing the hard work of changing your behavior and your thinking patterns. Your past is real, but so is your present. so is your commitment to being better. But what if people see these? A girl named Jennifer asked, holding up a photograph with shaking hands. What if whoever is doing this releases all of this evidence to the whole school, to colleges, to the media? Everything we have worked for will be destroyed. People will only see the monsters we used to be, not the people we are trying to become. The teacher looked at each of them, these children who had been broken and were now healing, and she made a decision that would change everything. Then we take away their power, she said. We do not wait for someone to expose us, we expose ourselves. The students stared at her in shock and confusion. What do you mean? Marcus asked. I mean we tell the truth before someone else can weaponize it, she explained. We own our past publicly, we stand up in front of the whole school and we admit everything we did. We show these photographs and videos ourselves, we take responsibility completely and honestly, and then we share what we have learned and how we have changed. That is insane, Sarah said, her eyes wide. Do you know what that would do to us? We would be humiliated, destroyed, everyone would hate us even more than they already do. Maybe, the teacher agreed, or maybe they would see courage, maybe they would see accountability, maybe they would see that redemption is possible even for people who have done terrible things. But more importantly, you would take control of your own story instead of living in fear of someone else telling it for you. Hey my people, this is the moment that will define everything. If you have been riding this emotional journey with these students, I need you to drop a like right now and comment what you think they should do. Should they expose themselves and risk everything, or should they try to hide and hope whoever is targeting them gives up? Share this story with someone who needs to understand that facing your past is the only way to truly be free from it. Subscribe because what happens next will leave you absolutely shaken. Now let us get back to the story, because the students were about to make a choice that would change their lives forever. The students debated for hours, their voices rising and falling as they argued about whether the teacher's plan was brave or suicidal, whether owning their past would set them free or destroy them completely. Some students thought they should find out who was targeting them and stop the threat before it escalated. Others thought they should just wait and hope the situation resolved itself. But slowly, gradually, a consensus began to form. She is right, Marcus finally said, and everyone turned to look at him. We have been saying we have changed, that we are different people now, but what does that mean if we only show our new selves when it is safe? Real change means being honest even when honesty might destroy us. It means taking responsibility even when the consequences are terrifying. Easy for you to say, another student muttered. Your father is already facing legal problems and everyone knows about your situation. The rest of us still have reputations to protect. Do you? Marcus challenged. Do you really, or are you just protecting an image that was built on lies and cruelty? What are you really afraid of losing? The question hung in the air like smoke, and one by one the students had to confront it honestly. What were they protecting? The respect of people who only liked them because they were scared of them, the admiration of peers who valued power over kindness, the approval of parents who cared more about status than character. I do not want to be afraid anymore, Sarah said quietly. I am tired of looking over my shoulder. I am tired of wondering when someone will expose me. If we do this ourselves, at least we control the narrative. At least we show people that we have the courage to face what we did. The twins nodded in agreement, then Jennifer, then others. Within an hour, all 17 students had agreed to the plan, despite their fear, despite the risks, despite not knowing how the school would respond. They spent the next week preparing, working with the teacher to create a presentation that was honest and raw and unflinching. They gathered all the evidence of their past cruelty, not just what the mysterious person had sent them, but everything they could find, every cruel message, every recorded incident, every documented moment of their reign of terror. They wrote scripts for what they would say, practicing until their voices were steady even when talking about their most shameful moments. The principal was initially resistant when they told him their plan, worried about the legal implications and the public relations nightmare and the potential backlash from parents. But the teacher convinced him that this was the right thing to do, that these students deserved the chance to own their narrative and demonstrate real accountability. He reluctantly agreed to give them an assembly slot, scheduling it for a Friday afternoon when the entire school would be gathered in the auditorium. The day of the assembly arrived with dark clouds gathering outside and a tension in the air that felt electric and dangerous. The students gathered backstage, and they could hear the auditorium filling with their peers, with teachers, with some parents who had been invited, all of them curious about what this mysterious assembly could be about. Rumors had been circulating for days. Some people thought it was an award ceremony. Others thought it was about a new school policy. No one suspected the truth. Marcus stood at the curtain looking out at the crowd, and his hands shook so badly he had to clasp them together to keep them still. "I cannot do this," he whispered to the teacher who stood beside him. "I thought I could, but I cannot. There are hundreds of people out there. They are going to hate us. They are going to destroy us." "Yes," the teacher agreed simply. This might be the worst day of your life. You might walk out of here with nothing left, no reputation, no status, no protection, but you will walk out of here free. Free from the fear of being exposed, free from the weight of unacknowledged guilt, free from the prison of your past." She put her hand on his shoulder. "You do not have to do this. None of you do. You can walk away right now and no one will judge you. But if you do this, if you stand up there and tell the truth, you will prove to yourself and everyone watching that your transformation is real, that you have the courage to be more than your worst moments." Marcus looked at the other 16 students gathered backstage, all of them pale and terrified and holding on to each other for support. Then he looked back at the teacher, this woman who had refused to give up on them when they were still monsters, who had stayed when any reasonable person would have run, who believed in their capacity for change even when they did not believe in themselves. "Let us do this," he said, and his voice was stronger now, "together." The lights dimmed in the auditorium, and the students walked onto the stage in a line, 17 teenagers who had once been the most feared people in the school and were now the most vulnerable. The audience quieted, curious and expectant. Marcus stepped forward to the microphone, and for a moment he just stood there looking out at all those faces, students they had tormented, teachers they had broken, parents who had enabled their cruelty, administrators who had failed to stop them. "My name is Marcus Thornton," he began, and his voice echoed through the sound system. "And 2 years ago I walked into a classroom on the third floor with 16 other students and we made a decision. We decided that we were untouchable. We decided that our parents' money and power meant we could do whatever we wanted without consequences. We decided that other people's pain was entertaining, that destroying teachers was a game, that cruelty was a form of strength." He paused and the auditorium was completely silent. "We were wrong, we were so terribly, devastatingly wrong, and today we are going to show you exactly what we did. We are going to show you the videos and the messages and the evidence of 2 years of systematic psychological warfare against teachers and students and anyone who stood in our way. We are not asking for your forgiveness. We are not making excuses. We are just telling the truth." For the next hour, the 17 students took turns at the microphone, sharing their stories with brutal honesty. They showed the videos of teachers breaking down and crying. They read aloud the cruel messages they had sent. They displayed photographs of pranks that had humiliated and traumatized people. They named their victims and acknowledged the specific harm they had caused each person. Some students in the audience cried, others looked angry. Many looked shocked because even though rumors had circulated about that classroom, no one had fully understood the scope and severity of what had been happening. Sarah stepped forward to share her part and her voice broke multiple times, but she kept going. "I told myself I was participating in this cruelty to protect myself, that if I did not join them I would become their victim instead. But the truth is I was scared to be alone. I was scared to stand up for what was right, and because of my cowardice people got hurt, teachers lost their careers, students were traumatized, and I am sorry, I am so deeply sorry." The twins shared their story together, explaining how their own abuse at home had turned them into abusers at school, how pain they did not know how to process had become weapons they used against others. "We thought making others feel small would make us feel big," David said, "but it just made us feel more empty." Jennifer, who had struggled with an eating disorder while simultaneously tormenting others, explained the twisted logic that had driven her behavior. "I hated myself so much that I wanted everyone else to hurt too. If I could not be happy, then no one deserved happiness. That is how broken I was." One by one, they shared their transformations, how the teacher had stayed when they tried to drive her away, how she had seen past their cruelty to their pain, how she had created a space where they could finally be honest about their struggles and their shame. They talked about the therapy and the hard work and the slow, painful process of becoming different people. They talked about learning empathy and accountability, and how to sit with the discomfort of knowing they had caused real harm that could never be fully repaired. "We are not telling you this story to make ourselves look good," Marcus said as they reached the conclusion of their presentation. "We are telling you because someone was trying to use our past to destroy us, and we realized that the only way to take away that power was to own our past completely. To stop hiding from who we were and start living openly as who we are trying to become." He took a deep breath. "Some of you will never forgive us, some of you will always see us as the monsters we were, and that is okay, that is your right, we do not deserve your forgiveness, but we want you to know that change is possible, that no matter how far you have fallen, no matter what you have done, you can choose to be different. It will not erase your past, it will not undo the harm, but it can create a different future." The auditorium was silent when they finished, and for a long, terrible moment, no one moved or spoke. The 17 students stood on that stage completely exposed, having laid bare their worst selves for everyone to judge, and they waited for the condemnation they knew they deserved. Then something unexpected happened. A student stood up in the third row, someone they had never noticed before, a quiet girl who kept to herself. She walked to the microphone that had been set up in the aisle for audience questions, and when she spoke, her voice was steady and clear. "You destroyed my older sister," she said, looking directly at Marcus. "She was teacher number 7. She was my hero. She loved teaching more than anything. And after 3 days in your classroom, she quit education completely. She works in retail now. She cries sometimes when she talks about what you did to her." Marcus's face crumbled with grief and shame, but he did not look away. "I hated you," the girl continued. "I have hated you for 2 years. I fantasized about revenge, about making you hurt the way you made her hurt." She paused, tears running down her face. "But watching you up there, seeing you take responsibility, hearing you acknowledge the harm you caused, it does not fix what you did. It does not give my sister her career back. But it is more than I expected, more than I thought people like you were capable of." She wiped her eyes. "I do not forgive you, I might never forgive you, but I believe that you are trying to be better, and maybe that is enough for now." She sat down and another student stood up, then another, some to express anger and pain, some to share how they had been victims of the group's cruelty, some to ask questions about the transformation process. The assembly that was supposed to last an hour stretched to 2 hours, then 3, as people lined up to speak to process to try to understand how such extreme cruelty had been possible and whether redemption was real. Teachers stood up to share their experiences. One man, the teacher who had walked out on his first day and never returned, was there in the audience, and he stood with tears streaming down his face. "I thought I was weak for leaving," he said. "I thought I had failed as an educator, but seeing you acknowledge what you did, it helps me understand it was not my failure. It was a systemic problem that no one person could solve. Thank you for that gift." The principal stood and addressed the audience, explaining the changes that had been implemented, the mandatory counseling, the family therapy, the new protocols for addressing student behavior and parent accountability. He acknowledged his own failures in allowing the situation to continue for so long, in prioritizing donations over student and teacher well-being, in not standing up to powerful parents who enabled their children's cruelty. Parents stood up, some defensive and angry, others tearful and apologetic. Marcus's mother, who had been sitting in the back, walked to the microphone with shaking steps. "I failed my son," she said, her voice breaking. "I let my husband's abuse continue. I prioritized our image over his well-being. I enabled his cruelty by never holding him accountable. I am sorry. I am so sorry to everyone my failure hurt." As the sun began to set outside and golden light streamed through the auditorium windows, the teacher stood up to speak for the first time. She had been sitting quietly in the front row, watching her students take responsibility and face their community with courage that left her in awe. "I am not the hero of this story," she said, and her voice carried to every corner of the room. "These 17 students are. They did something today that most adults never have the courage to do. They acknowledged their worst selves publicly. They took complete responsibility without making excuses. They faced the consequences of their actions with honesty and humility." She looked at her students standing on the stage, their faces exhausted and tear-stained and beautiful in their vulnerability. "I am so proud of you," she said. "Not because you are perfect now, but because you had the courage to be imperfect publicly, because you chose truth over comfort, because you proved that transformation is real." The assembly finally ended as darkness fell outside and the students walked off the stage into an uncertain future. Some of their peers hugged them, others turned away. Many were still processing, still trying to reconcile the monsters they had known with the humans they had just witnessed. There was no fairy tale ending, no moment where everyone forgave them and they lived happily ever after. Real life was messier than that, more complicated, filled with ongoing consequences and unresolved tensions and the hard daily work of proving that change was lasting. But as they walked out of the auditorium together, the 17 students felt something they had not felt in years: lightness. The weight of secrets and shame had been lifted. They had faced their worst fears and survived. Whatever happened next, they would face it as their true selves, not as the masks they had worn for so long. The teacher walked beside them and Marcus turned to her with a question that had been burning in his mind all day. "What if we just made everything worse?" he asked. "What if exposing ourselves like that just gives people more ammunition to use against us?" "Then we deal with it," she said simply. "Together, but at least now you are free from the fear of exposure. At least now you can start building a future on honesty instead of lies." They walked out into the cold January night, and the stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky, tiny points of light piercing through the darkness. But as they reached the parking lot, they noticed something that made them all stop in their tracks. Every car that belonged to one of the 17 students had been vandalized. Scratched into the paint of each vehicle were words, "Monsters, LIARS, never forgiven, you deserve worse." And spray-painted across the windshield of Marcus's car in red paint that looked disturbingly like blood were the words, "This is only the beginning." Sarah gasped and grabbed Marcus's arm. Someone was watching the assembly, someone who was not moved by our honesty, someone who wants to destroy us no matter what we do. The teacher pulled out her phone to call the police, but before she could dial, Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. He opened it with shaking hands and his face went pale as he read the message aloud. "Nice performance today, very moving, but you cannot apologize your way out of what you did. You think taking responsibility makes you heroes? You are still the same people who destroyed lives and broke spirits and drove good people to despair. And I am going to make sure everyone knows that redemption is a fairy tale. Watch your back, all of you. This is just the beginning of your reckoning." The 17 students looked at each other in the darkness, the vandalized cars surrounding them like evidence of how much hatred still existed, and they realized that their journey was far from over. Someone out there believed they did not deserve second chances. Someone was determined to make them pay for their past sins regardless of their present transformation. "Who is doing this?" Jennifer whispered, fear thick in her voice. "Who hates us this much?" "Maybe someone we hurt who was not in that auditorium," David suggested. "Someone whose pain runs too deep for public apologies to touch." "Or maybe," Daniel added quietly, "someone who benefits from us staying monsters. Someone who does not want to believe that people can change because it challenges their entire worldview." The teacher looked at the messages, at the vandalized cars, at the fear on her students' faces, and she felt a chill run down her spine that had nothing to do with the cold January air. This was not random teenage revenge. This was calculated, systematic, personal. Someone was orchestrating a campaign against these students with the same ruthless efficiency the students had once used against their teachers. And whoever it was, they were just getting started. Would the students' transformation be strong enough to survive this new threat, or would the sustained attack break them back into the cruel people they used to be? Could they prove that change was real when the whole world seemed determined to keep them locked in their past? And most terrifying of all, what would happen when they finally discovered the identity of their tormentor, and learned that the truth behind the attacks was far more devastating than anything they could have imagined? The answers would come soon, but they would cost more than any of them were prepared to pay.